President Trump tweeted a special remembrance on Holocaust Remembrance Day. It reads as follows: On Holocaust Remembrance Day, we mourn and grieve the murder of 6 million innocent Jewish men, women, and children, and the millions of others who perished in the evil Nazi genocide. We pledge with all of our might and resolve, never again. Hi, this is Jack Easum with Trump Republican News. Today, we want to briefly discuss the Holocaust and the Holocaust Remembrance Day. What President Trump tweeted was followed up with a statement issued from the White House. The headline from the White House statement reads as follows: Holocaust Remembrance Day. My heart is with you, on January 26th. From the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, Israel, people the world over will take time Saturday, January 27, to remember the approximately 6 million Jewish people and millions of others who were murdered during the Holocaust. International Holocaust Remembrance Day marks the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. As people pass and pause to reflect over the horrors inflicted by Nazism in Europe, world leaders also use the moment to condemn violence driven by religious and ethnic persecution. A quote from President Trump: "We will confront anti-Semitism, we will stamp out prejudice, we will condemn hatred, we will bear witness, and we will act." It's a quote from President Trump. The statement continues: Our nation is indebted to the Holocaust survivors. President Donald J. Trump said in a presidential message on International Holocaust Remembrance Day this week, despite the trauma they carry with them, they continue to educate us by sharing their experiences, strength, wisdom, and generosity of spirit to advance respect for human rights. The scale of the Holocaust depravity is difficult to fathom. 2 out of every 3 Jewish people in Europe were killed. To grasp the scale of human suffering, it's important to remember that behind every statistic is a story. Lily Applebaum Malik survived the death march from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen. She said, "We heard gunshots, and they were shooting people in the back who couldn't keep up with the walking," she remembers. It ended up being called the Death March because the ravines and the gutters, they were all red with blood. Every bit as systematic as the murder was the dehumanization of those crowded into the concentration camps across Europe. She quotes, "And they said, 'From now on, do not answer by your name. Your name is your number.' And the delusion, the disappointment, the discouragement that I felt like I was not a human person anymore." That's Lily Applebaum Malik. Voices from Auschwitz, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, even those who were spared death, faced anything but a normal life once the Nazis were defeated. Someone says, "I had no money, I had no clothes, I had no luggage, I had nothing." This is what Blanca Rothschild recalls of her experience upon liberation. Both of these stories are part of the Holocaust Memorial Museum's tribute to victims and survivors. First Lady Melania Trump visited the museum on Thursday, January 25. She concluded her tour at the Hall of Remembrance, taking a moment of silence by the Eternal Flame Memorial and lighting a candle. "My thoughts and prayers are with the people whose lives and families were broken by the horrors of the Holocaust," the First Lady said. "Yet it is also through our shared humanity that we come together now in commemoration, strength, and love. My heart is with you, and we remember." The White House. Thank you, President Trump, for having that statement issued. There's little I can add to it. because I wasn't alive during that period of time, but I've had the privilege to know a number of Holocaust survivors during my lifetime that did share part of their stories. Most of them don't like to talk about it, and I don't blame them. It's horrific. One man I knew who was a very successful businessman once he arrived in the United States, he and his father and his brother had been captured by the Nazis in Poland and put into a concentration camp with about 1,000 other people. As the Russians were coming toward the camp in a very warlike fashion as they were conquering, heading toward Berlin, the Nazis decided that they would kill every single prisoner in that camp. No prisoners, no story, no history. Dead men don't tell tales. Well, they gathered the people together to try to get them to kind of understand and conform that the camp was being closed down. And after the gathering, they started to lead the people out into the courtyard area, if you would call it that, but the empty killing field where they were going to kill everyone. And the man that I knew, he was about 16 years old. His little brother was about 10, and his father they were all together in the camp. As people were being let out, the guards got distracted, and the father, the 16-year-old and the 10-year-old, jumped and hid in the ovens and shut the doors behind them. That's right. They hid in the ovens. This was during the daytime. All of a sudden, gunshots rang out, and it started, and it continued, and it continued, and it continued for over 12 hours as they hunted people down who had ran, who had hidden, who had done whatever. But around midnight, the shots stopped, and that was only because the soldiers had decided to go ahead and leave the camp, to evacuate it. Hearing the silence after half an hour, they got out of the ovens in pitch black. There were no lights in the camp. They got on their bellies, all three of them, and crawled across the camp, climbing over dead bodies, bloodied situation. And the three of them finally got to the wire, slipped under the wire, and went out into the forest. Now, the man that I knew, who was 16 years old, he and his brother and father were able to live in the forest for about 2 months, and then the father just died from exposure. So then it was a 16-year-old and a 10-year-old. What do? You're in the middle of a forest, hiding from people that want to kill you. Well, they did what they could do. The older brother, the 16-year-old, he walked down, pretended to be, not an escapee from the camp, got some clothes from some farm, and then he went to work if he asked for work at the farms. And one farmer hired him as a day worker to do certain things, and he did. At night he would leave and go back to his brother in the forest, 10-year-old in the middle of a forest all day long by himself. And he would take him food and try to help him in whatever little other items that would help them survive. Well, this went on for a while, and then finally the farmer said, "I don't have any more work for you, you'll have to leave," and he left. And so he and his younger brother once again were on their own in the forest, and they started moving away from that area. Then, to their luck, the Russian army arrived and saw them and realized they were, vagabond young boys trying to survive. Well, the person that told me this story said they were just very, very lucky because one of the Russian soldiers, a sergeant, took him under his wing, had him work for him, gave them both uniforms to wear, and for all intents and purposes they were in the Russian army and protected by the Russian army as the Russians kept moving forward toward Berlin. Well, eventually the war ended. The young man and his brother, they came to America, and they went into business and worked very hard, and were very successful. But not all the stories end that way. And one other story I want to share that someone who was there told me personally was an American. He was a U.S. soldier, but he was a chaplain. He was a pastor. And when they came upon one of the camps, the concentration camps, he told me this personally years and years ago. It was so hideous. It was so terrible in terms of the smell and everything else related to it. He said it was just horrible. But he said the worst part about it, he said you'd think I would, as a pastor, be tending to the people that were the prisoners. But there was a bigger problem. Many of the soldiers who were hardened combat warriors and soldiers, who were used to seeing their friends get their heads blown off, by cannon fire or just any kind of shots or rifle bullets, what have you. These tough guys that were young but tough, he said half of them just couldn't take it and they got sick and started reacting to it, throwing up and those kinds of things. He said one soldier just started crying and didn't stop for 3 days. The inhumanity to man. So I guess the bottom line of what I'm trying to share today is the terrible, terrible things that happened sometimes disappear in our memories. That's why the Holocaust Remembrance Day is so important, to understand it. And it wasn't all Jews. It was many Catholics, many other religious groups, many other ethnic groups that were thrown into these concentration camps and killed or worked to death, and much worse for some. Well, that is today's show. And in closing, as President Trump likes to say, keep moving forward. Never, ever give up. God bless.